This is Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara. And this week, my guest is Kimanda Jarzebiak with Ascent Public Affairs, based out of Victoria. And I'm super excited. This is welcome to episode 22, I believe. But before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me on my own personal journey to acknowledge and share that I am personally committed to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence against Indigenous peoples. The land on which I live and work is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So before we get into Kimanda introducing herself, I am going to be making a public announcement. This is my last episode of Elected with the Orca, because as you all know by now, the Orca is ceasing to exist, but that doesn't mean that Elected is over. It just means that I'm going to be doing it on my own, and hopefully growing it in a different way and in ways that maybe are just happening a little bit sooner rather than later. So last week I made an appeal. So if there's someone listening who would be interested in potentially sponsoring Elected, a multi-partisan podcast for women in and around politics, and you're listening, please reach out to me. You can email me at Sarah at hello. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of words and I'm getting them all wrong. You can email me at hello, HELLO, at madame, MADAME, premier.com, and we can chat. So now that that's out of the way, Kimanda, welcome to Elected.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on Madam Premier.
Thanks.
I think one of the last sort of in-person events I was at, like a house party friend event, not a work event. There were, I think, 3 or 4 elected officials there, and 2 of them were wearing Madam Premier stuff. So yeah, it's amazing that you had the idea and that you're growing it and that it's so successful. I'm so proud of you. And yeah.
Thank you. Obviously, it's so nice to hear that. And it means so much to me when people tell me that they've seen people in Madam Premier, and obviously you've been incredibly supportive of it. And it makes my heart grow a million sizes when people tell me those kinds of things. And also I think something that I'll never forget is like someone once kind of covertly sent me a photo of someone at a party in BC and was like, this person is wearing your shirt, and like, it's amazing.
I was my last flight before the pandemic. I was coming back from a vacation with my sisters in San Diego, and I got on the flight wearing a Madam Premier sweatshirt, and a woman looked at me and said, "Right on," and I had to look at my shirt to figure out exactly
what political message.
I forgot I was wearing it, and I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it does actually start conversations. I've worn something, and then I've been at the grocery store checkout, and someone's been like, the cashier has been like, "Oh yeah, I love it," and then we'll have a conversation. And so yeah, it just happens in the most unexpected ways.
I think it's great. I think it's part of hopefully some broader societal change around equity and diversity, and a much needed continued change.
Agreed. But you're a longstanding member. Well, okay. So for anyone who doesn't know of you, and I would say that you are in BC political circles, like highly known.
No, I don't think so.
Very well respected. You're the perfect person to have, I think, on my last episode of Elected with the Orca, because everyone knows you in BC politics. And so for anyone who's listening outside of Alberta, do you mind just introducing yourself a little bit, and then they'll be more familiar with you?
Yeah, sure. Kimanda Jarzebiak. I live and work in Victoria. It is the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people. And on my list of Languages I'm starting to get my head around right now. That is one of them. I think knowing the land and the language that go with the land is, to me, incredibly important. I'm also learning Hebrew right now, which is harder than I thought it would be. I am a political public policy consultant. I think the dirty word is lobbyist. We try not to use that very much. It has connotations from America that don't transfer into Canada when we use it. I also am honored to be the chair and director of operations for the Boulders Climbing Gym in Central Saanich, and used to coach the national climbing team for about a decade.
And for anyone, you actually commentated during the Beijing Olympics for CBC.
Tokyo Olympics.
Oh, sorry, Tokyo.
Yeah, I got to be a member of the CBC Sports Olympic broadcast team, and oh my God, they're so talented and so good, and I learned so much and screwed up so very much.
Wow.
But it was a huge honor to watch sport climbing's debut at the Olympics and actually be a part of it.
Well, and unfortunately, it was, COVID didn't, you would have been able to be there to do it, but
no, instead we were on the 10th floor, I think, of the Toronto Broadcast Center. Not quite the same as Tokyo.
Not quite, but hopefully next time.
Paris 2024.
Oh, really? Oh, and then Paris is just, stunning. So.
And we're at the Place, I'm going to get this wrong, Place de la Concorde. That's where the climbing venue is.
Oh, wow.
In the square, in the center of Paris. And I asked, we're not going to be allowed to climb the big obelisk. They will be building a wall. They get really picky in countries about climbing historical monuments.
Well, I think that's best saved for impromptu activist protests.
Exactly.
Right? More impact making. So which is an interesting, we can use that as a segue to talk to get into politics. So let's just focus again, because I think it's worth pointing out again. So you own and lead BC's only, you are the owner and founder of BC's only female owned and led public affairs firm. How is it in this day and age in 2022 that you are still the only one?
Some have come and gone. I was the first to own a government relations firm, first woman. Others have sort of started and then stopped since then, because I think it is harder than it appears from the outside. I think there's this perception that government relations is simply having friends in the governing party and using those relationships to curry favor. And if that's your model, that's really difficult. And it's not what the work is at all. The work actually is understanding the process of government, understanding the budget cycles, electoral cycles, public policy development, and how the many different ways that they're impacted, and then helping clients be their own best advocates in the system.
That makes me think. I actually did that for my next door neighbor last night. She wanted to know because she has an issue, and she was like, I want to pick your brain about how to do this in the most effective way. And I was like, okay, can we meet outside and I'll bring my glass of wine? Obviously my very informal, you actually do it professionally.
Not much difference though. I sometimes feel like a combination of a concierge, a bureaucrat, and a political staffer all at the same time. And it's a privilege because we are outside the system, which allows us to see the system and how it's functioning. And it also allows us to understand how it's functioned differently over different periods of time. The pandemic was insane as government essentially in British Columbia changed what it was and what it did overnight. It had to. And so things that a provincial government wouldn't normally engage in, they had to, and in all sorts of different areas. And it was fascinating and again, privileged to be sitting just on the outside looking in and watching how it worked and didn't work, and then needing to not only catch what changes were happening, but be able to translate that into what our clients needed to do in order to help government achieve its goals. It was a crazy, crazy period.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing that I mean, in my mind, it's just like a bunch of people, like COVID happens. And in some ways, government is like a bunch of people standing in a room and they all have huge piles of paper in their hands. And then someone's like, COVID. And they're like, and then all of the paper just goes in the air and everything is just a disaster. And then you're scrambling and the paper. Yeah. In my mind, that's what it's like. But obviously, I know that's, not true.
I have to say that let's leave the politics aside for now, but at a bureaucratic level, some things were accomplished here by the civil service that I think were good and unprecedented and worthy of note. They created a program for rent assistance for tenants. They had to create the mechanism for delivery and they had to create the program pretty much overnight, and I think they managed to do that within 6 weeks. And there was a lot of it needed to be done. There was no way to piggyback on existing systems to do it. And the thing that stood out for me about the start of the pandemic was watching which governments realized that, for example, subsidy programs were no longer financial or taxation decisions, they were public health decisions. We moved out of some sort of grant or benefit to your average citizen. It was no longer, it was health policy all of a sudden, with how can we make sure the people can afford to stay home, and how do we keep maximum damage being done to society and our economy. I'm really curious about when it's over, because I don't think it is yet. It should be one of the most studied events in modern history. So I think we're going to learn a lot as well.
I've thought about it in the context of like, in however many years from now, we will all be able to watch this unfold like documentary style on like CNN, CBC. Everyone's doing their COVID, and it's like, and then looking back at other crises, it'll be like, it's not the Bay of Pigs, but it's like COVID, and then we're all going to be watching and like not wanting to really relive it. But yeah, for like future generations, they're going to be definitely looking at this, like my children.
You're basically saying you can't wait for the movie to come out.
Well, I mean, I've seen is it Contagion? Contagion. Yeah. That was like, that hit hard. And I watched that in the early days of COVID. So yeah, I don't know.
You're braver than I am. I had heard of it back when it came out, and then people were binge watching it. And I was like, no, I can't.
I don't think I'm going to be buying the COVID 2020 to whatever date coffee table book. Let's put it that way. Sorry to anyone.
I think we all have the coffee table book already. Like it's emblazoned.
Yeah, we all have like the step photos, and I'm going to be skipping out on the mug. So that's not something I'm going to be making. Having said that, I did make a t-shirt, but but I'm not going to be doing anything else COVID related.
All I kept thinking the whole way along, and still now that we're in it, is that is two thoughts. First of all, it reinforced how lucky I am. I had a job and a source of income that wasn't affected, and my work could easily be done remotely, and my staff could easily, do what they wanted. And that certainly wasn't the case for the majority of people. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that still sticks in my mind, I was talking to a dog owner while I was walking Pretzel last night, and he mentioned something that our two dogs were getting to know each other, and he said something about just all this grief came out about how all he had lost during the pandemic. He had divorced and lost his dog, and he was explaining that this is how he got his rescue dog, because he needed a dog. And he stopped himself and he said, people have had it so much worse than me, and I don't know why I'm complaining. And I said, because it's not a suffering Olympics. Like March 12th or March 13th or whenever, the 2020, whenever your life was affected, everyone lost. And that ability to grieve shouldn't be in comparison to how much someone else lost. Like life was just blown up.
Yeah.
And whatever you lost was significant for you. And I was trying to explain that to him, and it wasn't very eloquent. And then his dog saw a squirrel and they ran off. But
well, that's very lifelike. That's actually very internet-y. Because it's like,
and it was real life, not Twitter. So that was fun too.
So, I mean, I always love watching a good squirrel chase. So, I mean, it's interesting. Picking up on what you said about how the public service, not necessarily staying out of the politics of it, but was able to so quickly adapt to the needs of the public when COVID first happened. Now I kind of feel like it established a trend, let's say, or maybe expectation is a better word, in terms of expecting governments now to be able to respond to emerging issues as quickly as they did in some instances during the pandemic. Have you seen that as well?
What I've seen is a number of senior civil servants starting to ask the question, what is government's role now? Because certain industries were used to being in crisis mode for the last 2 years, and we're coming out of that. And I am worried that my client expectations are that government will always be there to solve their problems in a way that they did during the pandemic when it was an actual crisis. And I find I'm spending a bit of time right now helping differentiate between the urgent and the emergent. Something is happening, it's new and different. During the pandemic, something new and different was definitely urgent, or made us feel that way. And as hopefully the pandemic is starting to turn into an endemic, and I can't comment on that. I'm not an epidemiologist.
You're not? I think you're on the internet though. So like, aren't we all internet epidemiologists?
But it is, I am worried that people's, not that they expect government to act quickly in an emergency, we all should, but that we've lost the ability to distinguish what is an emergency and what is actually urgent, compared to what actually is new and different and maybe bothersome.
Agreed. Yeah. And I mean, yeah. It's like constantly living in a crisis and then having to, like, I think how we exit this is, and I am starting to hear more people say, like, how do we like manage this, like, is someone just going to tell us it's over, kind of like, when do we get to that point? It's like, when do we get off the roller coaster? And when do you let yourself off the roller coaster? Because at some point and I don't know what this looks like, but I do know a past life where I was a lifeguard and where I was a member of the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides. I still am. There is a clear start to a crisis. The ending is, it sort of kind of fades away. Yeah.
And things slowly return to a new normal. And I think we're also used to the early days of orders that some people didn't want the orders in the first place. Others found comfort in them and are uncomfortable with them going away. And that I think this adrenal failure we're all living through is keeping people from being logical and rational about their response to it. Does that make sense?
It does. I think anyone who's just lived through COVID will be like, yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
And I had to talk myself into coming back to the office. And now I'm loving it. I think, but like anything in life, people say that we don't like change, and that's not true. We're fine with change. What we aren't fine with is the transition from one state to the next.
Yeah.
We're fine with point A, we're fine with point C, getting between. And that's where we are right now. And I think it's incredibly uncomfortable for a lot of people, including
I think about it in terms of, well, I mean, I try to think, so what I do with my children who are 3 and 4, before something big happens. So like, even say we're going to go to the doctor tomorrow. I'll say the day before or a couple of days before, like, oh, hey, remember Dr. X, fill in the name, on whatever day, tomorrow or the day after, we're going to go and see her. And she's going to ask you some questions like, can I look in your eyes? Can I look in your mouth? She's going to use this, we have at home, like the pretend stethoscope. She's going to like use it to check your breathing, to like prep them because otherwise they're going to be like, why are you taking me to this person? I don't want to be here. Why are they touching me? That's cold. I don't like these lights, like all of those different things. And so I try to start that conversation earlier. And I find myself doing that with myself more, being like, okay, on Sunday, I am going to go to this place. And so it's not only what am I going to wear, but also like, how am I going to prepare myself mentally for being in a space, maybe with a lot of people, or what if none of them are wearing masks, or what if all of them are, or, like, I don't know. It's like I'm my own issues manager, if that makes sense.
Or expectation setting and managing.
Yes.
And I think the challenge for all of us who would love to do that is, pretty much 95% of what's going to happen at the doctor's office. We know 10% of what might be happening to manage ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You just, how do we know? And that's where I think a lot of the challenges for elected and non-elected officials right now. There is no crystal ball. We haven't come out of this before. And there's a lot of expectation set in people's own minds about what that means. And I'm breathing a sigh of relief, because I remember back to hearing from friends in northern Italy, in early March, and friends in New York City in April, about how horrible things were in 2020, and the months of March, April 2020, and hearing from people who were just terrified. And I'm trying to remind myself that we're not there right now, that the sense of frustration we have it may read to us as being the same as back then, but we're actually in a much different spot. The question I have is, how is the system of government functioning right now, given we've all just come through a pretty horrific, and I have to say it, unprecedented time. And I'm worried that I think we're seeing in the British Columbia civil service and political staff a lot of absences right now, people taking time off for various reasons or leaving at a time when we don't have access to the same labor pool we normally would have. There's an extreme talent shortage across all sectors in British Columbia, but including the government and political staff. And so we're seeing a system that in all areas, I think in at least British Columbia, that's really starting to show the wear and tear from the last 2 years.
Interesting. Let me just go and get my car keys and jump in my car and drive back to Victoria.
Please do.
And apply for a job.
I'm serious in that it's we're across my client base. We saw a number of senior executives on the client side in the last 2 years end their careers earlier than they thought they would. They could afford to, and they did, or they changed careers. And for us, we made it through the pandemic with our staff intact, but one of my people left to go do something they really wanted to do. It was this dream opportunity. We then searched, found someone, and this story, when I tell people a story, they hear it over and over again. So we found someone, they signed a contract, they were supposed to start May 1st and sent me a note a few days ago saying, got offered a better job in a different city for more money. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It was like, and one of our clients had hired someone in a senior position, and that person took a job with a large multinational company at the last second, again, after having signed a contract, which in today's labor market means nothing, because this big company was short-staffed and offered 50% more.
Wow. I kind of feel like that's like you're in a relationship, but you're still on dating apps. Like, what's going through your mind in terms of how do you reason that out to be okay if you're like in a committed relationship, which to me, that would be the equivalent of if you've signed a contract saying, I'm going to work for you. You don't still have your fish in the your feet in the water.
And the only reason I'm not really reacting is that before it happened to me, I watched it happen to a whole bunch of other people I knew, and had to think that this is the new normal, I guess. And I'm hoping that doesn't go on for very long, because it's
not. Yeah,
I mean, good for those who are looking for work. In that, I think it's the time to go find your dream job, but perhaps
think how you do it.
Yeah.
There's more
because especially for those who are early in their career, I don't think the job market's always going to be like this. I think, and I worry that for those early in their career, if this is what they're used to, or they think that's okay, they're eventually going to find that not everything is transactional.
Yes.
Yes. Some things are about reputation and relationships.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to put it, cryptocurrency is really popular talking point right now in Canadian political circles. So, not everything is like, Bitcoin transaction, like, there's more to it. Speaking of Bitcoin, do you let's talk about some more political things beyond COVID. We wanted to talk about trends in politics and things that you're seeing that I am interested in also talking about not only trends, but like the role of staff, political staff evolving, and also staff moving from staff to elected officials and staff in social media. So as a former staffer, who now gets to watch all of this happen on social media, and you being from BC and me being from Alberta, where it is like extreme here in Alberta. I don't know if you've, anyways, I'd love to talk about that, because it's super fascinating, and there's been such an evolution since I left politics in 2012. It's like a completely new world.
So I always come back to this from my perspective. I was honored enough to volunteer as a campaign manager about 20 plus times. In all of those times, except in very specific circumstances where I had to, I stayed out of the media and behind the candidate, wasn't the one introducing them at events, wasn't their spokesperson, because the candidate was the candidate and it was their name and their reputation. And I was honored to be volunteering. I'm seeing more and more, like a recent leadership race, the actual campaign managers being a figure in the campaign publicly. You be a figure to your volunteers, be a leader to your volunteers, but it shouldn't be a platform for people to hear about me because I'm an inconsequential volunteer. The person that I need to have the trust and respect of is the candidate, the candidate's family, and my volunteer team. And I just find it, but I say this because I've also noticed that happening over the last 20 years with political staff engaging in a way that looks like self-promotion sometimes and not necessarily tactical. So political staff engaging elected officials from opposing parties. or announcing, being the source of an announcement of big news.
Really?
Yeah, I won't go into that.
Okay.
But yeah, and sometimes I think it's unintended, but it also it irks me. It does irk me. It irks me a lot because I think political staff play a critical role, and it's not necessarily to support the person they're working for. It's to support the office and the title. And just as I always believe the best ministers, for example, don't take themselves seriously, but they do take the office and the title seriously, I also think that political staff should be serving that office and the title and not necessarily. Sometimes some of the activity you see on social media looks like self-promotion of the person doing it. And this is across political parties.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So, because I joined the BC Liberals in caucus in 2007. And so, like 2007, Twitter barely existed.
Yeah.
Facebook, Facebook was still relatively like new. Like not everyone was on a lot of different social media platforms. And so like that wasn't something that we were asked about when we joined, when we were like interviewed. But now obviously like that's obviously, well, we were all obviously vetted, like people were still doing checks on us, but not in the same. Now it's just completely, the landscape is completely different. We didn't like, I don't remember like tweeting about announcements, like, or like, I could be wrong. I need to go back and check now.
I would say that that's probably post 2013. Like, I think it's.
Yeah, I don't remember it being the same way. And honestly, my focus like at the time was like taking pictures and staffing my minister, or, like media, like doing all of those other things. It wasn't about managing those. We weren't managing those things like immediately on Twitter.
So here's what confounds me. Is I get that there is constant dialogue between, say, the press gallery and political staff. But if anyone's going to actually speak to the reporter on record, it's going to be the elected official most times, not a ministerial assistant or advisor, as they're now called. So why is that? Why would you have those boundaries for official media stories, but lose those boundaries on social media? That's what I don't understand. And there may be a reason, and I totally get that tactically sometimes you may want a senior political staffer to carry some water for you if you're an elected official, but it doesn't seem to be tactical. It just seems to be the new normal.
Honestly, because I think about when I first started working in the legislature in BC and the way that we were told, essentially, like, don't do anything that you don't want ending up on the front page of a newspaper. To me, that rule still applies. But it's not just a newspaper, it's also social media platforms. And so my personal conduct at the time when I worked in politics was also a representation of my professional conduct. And I took that really seriously. And I don't necessarily see, you're my grimacing. I don't see that nowadays. And I
know, and part of me wonders if I'm just old and like I'm too old to understand.
No, I don't think so, because like I don't understand. I think it takes away. I mean, even just before we started recording this podcast, there was just like in the avalanche of daily stuff that happens in Alberta politics. So there's this ongoing internal UCP drama. There's a leadership, pretzel,
special. She's about to start barking, so I'm just going to pick her up for a sec. Sorry.
There's like this special AGM happening, and UCP members are voting on if they want Jason Kenney to stay on as leader. Anyways, so there's a podcast, a pretty popular podcast here in Alberta with the host. His name is Ryan Jesperson, and he just had on someone who is working for Brian Jean, who just, anyways, it's so complicated. It's like a soap opera. It's a novella. Anyways, so I saw that this interaction, Ryan Jesperson tweeted something out about having this person on, and then someone from their own party who works as the director of issues management for the premier started saying, you know, I'm just like, this person actually, anyways, it is just so messy. And honestly, everyone is getting paid by the taxpayers. These two people who both apparently work for, one is a constituency assistant, one is an issues manager for the premier. So both, you know, potentially earning taxpayer funded salaries. But they're also doing all of this back and forth around who's getting paid and who's not on Twitter. I'm sorry, but when did we forget about governing, and why are you doing this here and now? Like, I don't get it.
It's just a sense of, I think, just a reset and a sense of decorum, but also back to, and I sound so old and fusty when I say decorum, but I do value our system of government so much. My family came here post World War II, one of them as what was then called displaced person, but now we'd call a refugee. And we were told every single day of our life that we were lucky to be here, that we had a vital responsibility to the system of government and democracy. And we were told to guard it and to protect it, because when we disintegrate and when that fails, bad shit happens.
Yeah.
And I worry that the lack of decorum and the lack of respect starts us down a road of seeing someone as an other because they don't share our beliefs, rather than understanding that we should fight about 10%, 10 to 20% of what we discuss should be partisan, and we should disagree, but we should also be looking for the 80% where we have things in common because we're humans.
Unfortunately, I think to me, I mean, I feel like there's like a red alert going off, because that's obviously, to me, not what politicians are doing right now, specifically on the conservative side, heightened obviously by a leadership contest federally. But I feel like there's a tendency right now to burn down things rather than build them up. And that's great until you inherit potentially that which you have burned down, and are then responsible for putting back together. So, I guess I'm old and fussy too. I'm not saying you're fussy. I'm saying I'm fussy.
Oh, I meant to say fusty. I'm not even sure if that's the word.
Oh, because I definitely don't think that, I think that a modicum of that adage of, don't do anything you wouldn't want to see needs to be like pulled back in. And maybe, I don't know, is it the people who are getting hired? Is it a generational thing? Is it, people feel like they're owed this kind of public cachet that elected officials have that they want in on? Or is it even like, you aspire to be a politician, and so this is like how you're going to kind of partially build up your credibility and name recognition? I don't know.
Part of me thinks that we're seeing more and more a career path that is political staffer to elected official, and without being gainfully employed in between. They're both gainful employment, but I would love to know that in between your time as a political staffer before you run for office, if that's why you're becoming a political staffer is because you want to run for office one day, that in between you do something outside of politics and government and media, that you do something that challenges you and makes you grow and learns about different segments of society.
Yeah. How outside of being political and learning politics and politicking, what are you doing? So say, you say you're lucky enough to be the Minister of Education or Finance or whatever the ministry is. Hopefully you get put in that position because you actually have experience in that field. And
no, I don't, not for ministers. That's funny.
no, but just I'm thinking like if you go from political staff, right, to politician, you need to have that. You need to have something to be able to back up what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Not that, so like, because
I'm Dr. Moira Stilwell and I will always disagree with this. I don't want a doctor to be the Minister of Health ever. But I do want the person who is the Minister of Health to have held serious positions, or any minister to have had a job other than political staffer prior to becoming leader. I want to have started and run a not-for-profit. I would like them to know the challenges of meeting payroll and understanding that as a small business person, you're often paying your staff and not yourself, and actually having to, live through that.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes worry that some of the stuff that's going on in social media is people thinking that political staff thinking about their next job and pursuing profile for themselves and not taking care of what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Oh, can I also say that it's in British Columbia, it's very few political staff, and they're on all parties. Many are actually just respectful and responsible, and you and I would recognize the behavior from, previous years. So
yeah. Well, I think that in Alberta, it's just like you have ministers responding to tweets from staff. That happened a couple of weeks ago. Like, and in a very, it's just very, the politics in Alberta is just so intense, so personal, so volatile, so dramatic. It's just next level. It's like, when I listen to Jordan and McLean on BC Poly Hot Stove, and I'm like listening to them, and I'm, obviously I understand that some issues are really important, and that, listening to them talk about different things, and I think to myself, I wish that is what our problems were here, because they are more or less normal governing issues, not whether we're talking about, multi-year ongoing RCMP investigations that, are just, or, there are just so many different things, or former justice ministers being held in contempt of court. That was only a couple of weeks ago. Or, it just like, it goes on and on and on and on. And I would love that normalcy of.
I do think it seems a little like Alberta has somehow inherited the mantle that British Columbia had in the 80s and 90s. We were the wacky left coast. Things were just crazy over here, and you can't make up the stuff that was going on, whether it was Van der Zam and the bag of money from Faye, or whether it was RCMP and Premier Clark's home over a deck in a casino. Like, it used to be that was us, and it feels like, aside from the wood splitter, it's been, you're right, the debate out here, while there's pressing issues, at least it seems to be a little less about personalities.
Yeah,
you still see MLAs here. It was a minister's birthday the other day, and one of the photos on her social media feed was a member of the opposition giving her a birthday hug. Like, thank goodness.
Yeah.
That we're still seeing the humanity, and we can take the issues and argue, but we still see that the other person is human.
And I do hear that occasionally from people in politics in Alberta, that they are able to do that. But increasingly, I've my takeaway is that that's just not happening, and that it's especially, well, we're going into a provincial election supposedly next year. There's been talk that it might happen in the fall, depending on what happens.
I've heard. Any predictions?
If Jason Kenney doesn't win the May 18th, well, if it happens if we get the results on May 18th, and by we, I mean all of Alberta.
And you're all watching too. We're all incredibly curious, so.
So if he doesn't win, obviously he said he'll step down. So that would immediately, they would go into a leadership contest. So I mean, yeah, it could play out that, I just see complete implosion, to be honest. I don't see how that party, the UCP, can, it's too splintered. I don't know who that person would be. They would have to be a magician, I think, honestly, to be able to put it back together. Because it's just too fractured. And Kenny has also said if he wins, and that's like you're either with me or against me, essentially. So that's fine. Let's say enough MLAs leave that he no longer has a majority. Does that mean we'd be potentially going into it? There's just so many variables. There's so many, it's supremely fascinating for anyone who loves politics, but I can tell you that living here and just like as a bystander of witnessing it and paying attention, it feels overwhelming. And I am really, really looking forward to potentially, I want whoever it is that's governing, who wins the election, to govern. I want them to govern. That is their job. I am so tired of the internal drama of, the political parties here being, the center of attention, because like there are a lot of really serious things going on here that we need to talk about. And they just aren't.
Well, and so I will say this, that the serious things that are going on here, like the absolute crisis in primary care on South Vancouver Island, they are being discussed in an inflammatory way, obviously, in the legislature that, brought out Angry Dad John. But they're at least being discussed and with passion. And so at least for the things that I see in the culture that I don't like, they aren't yet impeding the process of rigorous debate. And I'm grateful for that, because I really long for stability and good governance for everyone around the world. I worry that democracy is teetering on the edge. And
agreed. It is
not necessarily in Canada, not necessarily in British Columbia, but when there's a collapse of it around the world, it affects all of us, and we've seen that repeatedly throughout human history.
Well, and also politicians who see that as an opportunity to further their own cause.
I mean, I get that humans are going to behave badly. I just wish we could be a little more innovative when we do it sometimes. It feels like we're just doing it the same old way. And that is both, it's boring and scary at the same time.
Well, we just never seem to learn, do we? As much as we say that, we're going to learn from our mistakes and not repeat things and not do things the same way, we are seemingly overwhelmingly committed as a society to doing exactly that.
Yeah. And I through my time volunteering with the national climbing team, I got to know so many athletes from around the world, and I still have, good friends and contacts in Ukraine. And I just, watching and having to see firsthand what that looks like, it's been so upsetting. And to lose something like that. And it wasn't in an instant. They saw it. I mean, we've been watching it coming for years and been unable to stop it. And I just wish we would all get a sense of perspective when it came to the fact that we are very privileged to be able to tackle the problems in our own country in a way that so far involves very little bloodshed or true lack of freedom.
Agreed. Agreed. Wholeheartedly agreed. It really bothers me whenever I see someone, a politician, talking about freedom, because yes,
we're we are still so very lucky here, and lucky that we're, faced with significant challenges. I'm not suggesting that it's flawless, and certainly, particularly for a segment of the population, it's definitely not an ideal place to live, and it's a horrible place to live. I'm sure we have the ability, though, to use our words and actions to fix things and have dialogue and try and move forward in a way that is not an option for people in other parts of the world right now. And I just would like to give I'm so glad that the Victoria Police eventually stepped in, because we were getting these crazy Saturday protests, the trucker convoy, and I was losing patience and was going on Twitter rants, which normally isn't me, just because the things that we were seeing and they were shouting and that they believed, the disinformation was significant and the disruption was significant, but all over things that, in the global scheme of things, not important.
yeah. Unfortunately, I don't feel like there was anyone really filling that vacuum of putting it to people that way. Like, even like provincially here in Alberta, that wasn't the message that was really, it wasn't, and anytime there was an attempt to do it, it was just like, it didn't come across as genuine. But like,
and I feel like some on the progressive side of things, and I'm not going to define what that means, used the opportunity to boost their own profile and therefore alienate and make the problem worse. And I'm going to both sides this. There wasn't a lot of compassionate human behavior on display over the last few months.
Yeah. Well, and now we're reaping the consequences of that, and will be for the foreseeable future. It's like we're on a train and we can't pull the brake. So, like we're all going to reap what we are sowing, whether it's us sowing it or not, but we are just,
I'm really curious how we get over what seems to have been, for the amount of disinformation that was floating around during the pandemic. I'm curious about the origins of it, and then how do you actually effectively counter that? I've heard stories. One of my friends has a friend, and I know this is everything disinformation starts with a friend's friend, so I get the irony here. But she is completely bought into the conspiracy theories to the point where she's lost her relationship, and is just believes that Putin should be invading Ukraine, and believes that Bill Gates is behind this, and prior to the pandemic was a rational human being who saw this society through the same lights that everyone else does. And I have been lucky enough to be close enough to government to understand that there just isn't the ability to perpetrate any sort of conspiracy.
Yes.
And I don't know.
That being said, I believe government should have a role in identifying this as an emerging issue and responding to it. And I don't see anyone, I feel like that's a void right now. I don't see anyone necessarily stepping up. I saw actually, I think it was last week, that former President Barack Obama has picked this up as a cause. But he can't do it alone. And it's really serious, and we want to talk about having conversations around, I forget what number of the name of the bill, but or regulating the internet, as much as some people will say, or Elon Musk buying Twitter. Twitter is not government. Twitter is a private corporation. Facebook is a private, publicly traded corporation business. They don't owe anybody anything. They have no they're not the Bank of Canada. They're not,
Yeah.
a legislative body. They will do whatever they can to make money.
Yeah, but I'm curious, we do regulate other forms of media. So
Yes.
I don't have an opinion on the federal bill, although
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's the right solution. But I haven't looked at it enough, quite honestly. But I do think, given that the disinformation is harmful to society, how do you address that, both on a societal level? Like how do we, I want to say deprogram, but that's unfair because I'm not suggesting it's a cult. How do you, if we can't fix the problem as it currently is, and I don't know the answer to that, I would love someone with a background in communications and a registered psychologist to address it. But what does the regulatory framework look like? Because in Canada, traditional media can't just say what they want. But social media can, as you said, not bound by the same constraints. So
yeah. Well, I think this is maybe, if anyone's listening and you want to talk about like one way to, kind of like start the conversation about things that have happened during the pandemic and a future way forward, the misinformation piece is, I think, critical to any kind of conversation because of the prevalence of it over the last 2 years in a way that we've never seen before.
Well, but I think misinformation is always going to be there. What I worry about is the intentional disinformation. That's what feels to me like was being manipulated by something, whether it was algorithms that had design flaws because we didn't realize the power, or whether it's foreign actors thinking that now's a good time to kind of fiddle with democracy. I don't know enough to know. I just know that the disinformation itself had a significant negative effect on society.
Yeah. When I said misinformation, I also meant to include disinformation, but they are different. But yeah, I feel like we started talking about COVID and now we're talking about mis and disinformation, and we're just like, it's kind of been like a roller coaster in terms of like emotions and like highs and lows. Yeah.
It's a bit like life right now.
It is. It's kind of like every day. It is. Yeah. Right? Deep breaths, exhaling and inhaling. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there for today, but I really thank you for coming on and like for chatting with me and covering so many different topics, and for being my last Elected on the Orca podcast.
On the Orca, I'm sure Elected is going to get picked up. You'll find sponsors, 100%.
Yeah, I hope so. If you're out there and you're listening, remember to email me.
And that's hello@madampremier.com.
It is. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, I think that there has to be space in political circles for hopefully thoughtful conversations that, aren't binary, from a multi-partisan perspective, that also focus on women and women's issues. So thank you for being a part of the conversation today.
Such an honor. I had fun.
Great. And
Pretzel says goodbye as well.
Oh, well, if anyone's listening and you don't follow Kimanda on Twitter, Pretzel is a regular star attraction, I would say. I think everybody loves Pretzel.
She's pretty fun.
Yeah, she's just the cutest little thing. So anyways, now we're like talking about dogs. So thank you.
On that note,
thank you for listening to Elected. And I actually, before we wrap up, I just want to say that a special thank you to McLean Kay, obviously from the editor-in-chief and the founder of the Orca. McLean and I used to work in politics together in BC. I had wanted to do a podcast for a really long time, but just didn't do it. I lacked the confidence, and was holding myself back from doing it. And it was thanks to him and his kind of support and his, pep talks, and that this, came to be. So that really means like a lot to me. And he's just such a good person. His family is amazing. So McLean, if you're listening and you've made it to this point in our podcast, I just want to say a very special thank you. And like, you're an incredible human. So thank you for listening to this episode of Ellected. There may be a bit of a break between now and when the next episode comes out, just because I'm going to be getting things sorted and coming out. But the best way to understand what's happening and when the next episode will be, I will to follow Ellected on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It's at Ellected, ELLECTED podcast on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So until we meet again, thank you, Kimanda, and thank you for listening.